Frank Delaney woke up to the sound of silence, a silence so thick it pressed against his ears like cotton. The clock on the nightstand blinked 6:07 a.m., its red digits faint against the early morning light slipping through the blinds. His joints ached before his feet even touched the floor, and as he reached for his glasses, the same question whispered through his mind for the 100th time that week, is this it? He shuffled to the kitchen, the soles of his slippers rasping softly against the tile. The coffee pot sputtered to life, hissing steam like it resented being used. He reached into the cupboard for his favorite mug, chipped on the rim but still solid, then stared out the window as the coffee dripped. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked at nothing. Somewhere in the distance, a school bus exhaled at the corner, loading kids with lives still ahead of them. On the kitchen table sat a card from his Medicare provider and a coupon for discounted joint supplements. Nothing from Danny. Not a single call. Not even a text. It was his birthday today. 72. No candles. No laughter. No phone calls full of, "Hey Dad, remember when?" Just silence and caffeine and a body that no longer felt like his. He sat at the table, opened his tablet, and flicked through Facebook. Ads for retirement homes and hearing aids. A memory from 11 years ago popped up, a photo of him and Marlene standing in front of his homemade solar mower. They were both grinning, young, hopeful. Back when he believed he was building something that mattered. He clicked play on a random YouTube video, just to drown out the quiet. It was a clip from an old Elon Musk interview. Frank didn't care much for tech moguls. He didn't understand half of what they were building, and even less of what they were saying. But then Elon leaned forward in the clip, eyes sharp, voice calm. "I don't believe in limits. Not time. Not failure. Every day is a chance to build something new. Reinvention doesn't care how old you are." Frank froze. Something about the way he said it, it wasn't hype. It wasn't polished. It sounded like he meant it. Like it applied to more than just young coders in Silicon Valley. Frank leaned back in his chair and hit replay. "I don't believe in limits." The word scratched at something deep in his chest. He turned the volume up. Not time. Not failure. His hand hovered over the screen as if the message might change the longer he stared. Every day is a chance to build something new. He glanced at the garage door, closed and quiet, like a tomb for all his unfinished projects. The mower was still out there. Covered in a tarp, untouched for years. Frank hadn't stepped into that garage in months, maybe a year. Marlene used to call it Frank's lab, even though it was more dust than invention now. He drained his coffee, wiped his hands on his jeans, and stood. It felt impulsive. Reckless. Stupid. But he shuffled to the back door, grabbed the cold brass handle, and pushed it open. The air inside was stale, tinged with old motor oil and cedar. Shafts of morning light filtered in through a high window, illuminating the old workbench and the shelves lined with forgotten dreams. He pulled back the tarp. The mower looked like something out of a sci-fi film built on a retirement budget, solar panels bolted to a rusted lawnmower frame, cables hanging loosely like forgotten vines. He ran a hand across the metal, fingertips brushing years of dust. Marlene had loved this thing. She said it reminded her that Frank was more than just a man who punched a clock. He was a builder. A thinker. A doer. He had been an expert machinist, known at the plant for his steady hands and clever modifications. He'd once redesigned a part that saved the company tens of thousands in downtime. But when he retired, it was like someone turned the lights off inside him. No more challenges. No more deadlines. Just long afternoons and reruns. He looked down at the mower again. What if he tried to fix it? Not because it would go anywhere. Not because he had a plan. Just because. He remembered another part of that Elon clip. "People ask me when I'll stop. I don't understand the question." Stop what? Thinking. Building. Breathing. Frank chuckled under his breath. "All right, Musk," he muttered. "Let's see if you're right." The wrench was still hanging on the pegboard, exactly where he left it. His fingers curled around it, and a memory flooded in, Marlene standing in the doorway years ago, holding lemonade, smiling like she was watching something sacred. "Just don't blow yourself up," she had teased. He'd laughed, confident, alive. He missed that man. Missed her. He crouched beside the mower, ignoring the stab of pain in his knee. The bolts were rusted. The wires frayed. But it was still here. Still real. Still his. He fiddled with the wiring, testing voltage with a multimeter. Dead. But not hopeless. He stood again, slower this time, and wiped his brow. Dust danced in the sunbeams like tiny ghosts of who he used to be. Something in his chest tightened, not in a dangerous way, but in the way a flame catches after nearly going out. For the first time in years, he wasn't just killing time. He was doing something. Maybe not something big. Maybe not something brilliant. But something. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Frank sat back at the kitchen table. His hands were dirty. His knees ached. But he felt good. Not young. Not fixed. But good. He clicked back to the video, watching Elon finish his thought. The only real enemy is comfort. When you stop chasing discomfort, you stop growing. Frank exhaled sharply. He opened a new tab, typed "solar mower battery replacement" into the search bar, and began reading. His stomach growled, but he ignored it. The world outside grew dark. He didn't notice. His fingers moved across the keyboard with the kind of focus he hadn't felt since he left the factory floor. The weight in his chest wasn't gone, but it had shifted, less like a burden, more like a seed pressing against the soil, trying to break through. As midnight neared, the silence in the house no longer felt like an accusation. It felt like a pause. A breath held before a first step. Before turning off the screen, he posted a question in an online forum he hadn't used in over a decade: "Need help restoring an old solar mower prototype? It still has potential." "So do I." He clicked send, sat back, and smiled to himself. Maybe nobody would answer. Maybe it wouldn't go anywhere. But for the first time in years, Frank Delaney didn't feel invisible. He felt curious. And maybe, just maybe, curiosity was the first step back to life. Outside, the stars shimmered quietly. Somewhere, across 100 miles and a million dreams, Elon Musk was probably working on a rocket or building another piece of the future. Frank wasn't trying to reach Mars. He just wanted to remember what it felt like to matter. "Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from," the video had said, echoing in his memory. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Frank whispered into the silence, "I used to think it was Marlene. Maybe now, it's me." Frank Delaney was never the kind of man who needed attention. He was a builder, a doer, a guy who found comfort in machines that clicked, whirred, and moved the way they were supposed to. Born in 1953 in a town that never made the news, he grew up watching his father fix cars in the gravel driveway, grease under his nails and a cigarette in his mouth, swearing at engines like they were old friends who'd betrayed him. Frank learned to use a wrench before he learned to kiss a girl, and by 16 he could rebuild a transmission blindfolded. His world was small but solid. He wasn't a dreamer like his younger brother, Bobby, who always talked about being a writer or moving out west. Frank wanted a steady job, a good woman, and enough money to keep the lights on and a project in the garage. In 1975, he got all three. He married Marlene Collins that June after meeting her at the county fair. She sold hand-painted signs and wore her hair in a wild red braid that seemed to glow in the sun. She was loud, funny, too smart for her own good, and had a way of looking at Frank like he was the most interesting person in the room. She was an artist and he was a machinist, but somehow they fit. They bought a modest house 2 blocks from where he grew up. The garage became his kingdom. She painted in the dining room. They talked late into the night about everything and nothing. He told her about a lawnmower he wanted to redesign to run entirely on solar energy. "You're like Tesla," she said once, not knowing how true that would feel decades later. Frank just laughed. He didn't care about fame. He cared about figuring things out. The plant hired him full-time in 1977. For 35 years, he worked the machines, tuned the tools, solved the little problems that kept production moving. He never made headlines, never missed a shift, never got promoted, but was always the one the younger guys went to when a belt snapped or a gear didn't sit right. He became the kind of man people depended on without even realizing it. And that was enough. For a long time, that was enough. In 1981, Danny was born. Their only child. Marlene cried when they brought him home. Frank cried when he first saw him smile. Fatherhood changed him in ways he didn't expect. He started reading manuals about toy assembly and backyard playgrounds instead of carburetors. Danny was a quiet kid, smart, sensitive, a little dreamy like his mom. Frank tried to teach him how to use tools, but Danny was more interested in books, video games, science fiction. Frank didn't understand it, but he didn't fight it either. He supported it the only way he knew how, by showing up, by working late, by paying the bills. Sometimes he wished they talked more. Sometimes he didn't know how. Then came the solar mower. It was 1993 when Frank first had the idea. The energy crisis was on the news, and he hated the smell of gas in the garage. He started tinkering in the evenings, welding panels to frames, testing batteries, trying to build something that could last. Marlene painted his blueprints, turned them into framed art, hung them in the hallway. She told neighbors he was building the future in our backyard. Frank would just shake his head and grin. The mower worked, for a few minutes at a time. It would stutter, die, then spark back to life. He couldn't get the battery calibration right. But for a few months in '94, he felt like he was chasing something real. Then Danny started high school and got caught shoplifting with a couple of friends. Marlene got sick for the first time, a lump in her breast they had to biopsy. The bills piled up. The mower sat in the garage untouched. Frank started working overtime again. The dream folded in on itself, packed away under a tarp like it had never existed. The machine got dusty. So did Frank. Marlene beat the cancer. Danny graduated. Life rolled forward like a slow tractor. There were bright moments, of course. A family trip to Yellowstone in 2003. A wedding anniversary where they slow danced in the kitchen, no music, just her humming. And always, always, the smell of sawdust and paint and fresh cut grass in the spring. But something quiet shifted inside Frank after he turned 60. Retirement started looming like a mountain, not a vacation. He watched friends leave the plant and vanish into their recliners, talking only about the weather and their medications. He told himself he'd do more. He'd fix the mower. He'd paint the garage. He'd write down his designs. He'd build something again. But when his retirement party came in 2015, he just shook hands, took his plaque, and went home. No big send-off. No plan. Just a quiet dinner with Marlene and Danny, who was already living 3 states away with a wife Frank barely knew. They tried to stay close. Holidays. Calls. A few texts. But Danny was busy, always busy. Startups. Investments. Some kind of sustainability work that Frank never really understood. He felt proud, yes, but also left behind. Like his son had taken off for some other orbit and forgotten how to land back home. Then came the stroke. Not Frank's. Marlene's. It hit her in the middle of the night in October 2019. 1 minute she was beside him, warm and breathing. The next, she was gone. Not instantly. But in slow, terrible inches. Hospitals. Therapies. The words never came back. Neither did the smile. She passed 6 months later. Quiet. Peaceful. With his hand in hers. But something inside Frank broke open, wide and raw. The house was too quiet. The days were too long. And the mower, God, the mower just stared at him from the garage like a ghost. In the weeks after her funeral, he sat in his recliner and watched old VHS tapes of them dancing. He didn't answer calls. He ate canned soup. He turned 71 and didn't tell anyone. Danny called less. Frank said less. The world just kept spinning, and he didn't know what he was still doing in it. Until that clip. Until Musk's voice cracked the silence. I don't believe in limits. It hit him like a wrench to the ribs. Because Frank had stopped believing in anything. Not on purpose. It just happened. Time washed the color out of everything. He wasn't sad. Not exactly. He was just empty. Like a project left half-finished, missing one last bolt that no one would ever tighten. And in that single sentence, on that random night, with coffee in his hand and dust in his lungs, he felt something stir. Not much. But enough. Enough to wake up. Enough to walk to the garage. Enough to remember who he used to be. Not a genius. Not a mogul. But a builder. A man who fixed things. A man who made things better. The world didn't need another lawnmower. It didn't even need him, probably. But Frank needed to believe again. In something. In himself. So he went back to the garage. Back to the workbench. Back to the silence that didn't hurt anymore. Just space. Space waiting to be filled. Frank Delaney sat on the edge of his bed, one sock on, the other dangling from his hand like it had forgotten what it was supposed to do. The morning sunlight had no warmth, just a white glare across the faded photos on his dresser. He rubbed his knee, winced, then sighed through clenched teeth. Another day. Another reminder that nothing felt easy anymore. He stood slowly, walking stiff-legged down the hallway, past Marlene's old sewing room now coated in quiet. The house felt like a museum exhibit about someone else's life. The air was clean, the surfaces dusted, but everything in it belonged to a time that no longer existed. He passed the living room, saw his recliner, the one he had spent nearly a year disappearing into, and the blanket folded neatly over its back, untouched since the day he first stepped back into the garage. The kitchen radio played low from the windowsill, some news segment about market drops and climate bills and billionaires going to space. Frank poured himself coffee, black and bitter. He stared out the window and watched the neighbor's grandson ride his bike down the sidewalk, full of speed and purpose. The boy waved. Frank lifted his mug slightly in return but said nothing. He hadn't spoken to anyone in 2 days. Maybe 3. The truth was, ever since he started fiddling with the mower again, he felt like he was caught between 2 worlds. 1 foot in the past, surrounded by memories and aging bones, and the other in something new, uncertain, and foolishly hopeful. But that hope was fragile, brittle as old wiring. He took his coffee to the table and opened the tablet again, swiping through the forum he'd posted in last week. Still no replies. No help. Just digital silence. He scrolled through old threads about battery types, gear ratios, solar angles, but nothing felt useful. He clicked over to YouTube, typed "solar conversion project," and watched a video of a 20-something kid in a garage assembling a drone. The kid talked fast, cracked jokes, and moved like someone whose back didn't hurt just from breathing. Frank closed the tab. He glanced toward the garage door, then back at the cold coffee in his hands. He hadn't gone out there yesterday. Or the day before. His momentum had hit a wall. He felt foolish. Pointless. He was 72 years old and alone in a house full of ghosts, trying to rebuild a failed invention like it meant something. He opened his text messages. Still no reply from Danny. He had sent a photo of the mower 2 weeks ago. Just the frame with some fresh wires. A message beneath it, starting to put it back together. Might finish what I started. No response. Not even a thumbs up. Frank set the tablet down and stood slowly. He walked to the sink, rinsed his mug, then stared at the dishes in the drying rack. A single spoon. One plate. A bowl. The signs of a life no one else shared anymore. He remembered Marlene's voice like a song he couldn't quite hum. "You're still building things," she used to say. "That means you're still alive." But was he? Really? Or was he just dragging time along behind him like an old cart with broken wheels? He rubbed his eyes, then walked to the front door. Outside, the sky was pale and flat. The mailbox was empty. He walked back inside and sank into the recliner. He turned on the TV out of habit and flipped through channels. A medication commercial played, smiling seniors walking on beaches, their silver hair blowing in the wind as disclaimers listed side effects in fast, anxious voices. He turned the volume down. Then off. He picked up the remote again but hesitated. Something tugged at the back of his mind. That voice. Musk's voice. Calm. Flat. Unapologetic. You can always reinvent yourself. Age is a construct. Frank grabbed the tablet again. He searched for the interview, found the full version. It was an old one, Elon sitting in a plain chair, no suit, no sales pitch. Just answering questions. Someone asked about retirement. Elon laughed. "Why would I stop?" he said. "People act like age is a full stop. But it's not. It's just the next iteration. I plan to work until I can't move. Not because I need to, but because I love solving problems. If you're breathing, you still have work to do." Frank watched, the words landing like slow drops of water in a dry well. Then came the moment that got him the first time. The world is obsessed with youth, but wisdom only comes from surviving things. If you've survived, you have something to build with. Frank paused the video and stared at the screen. He had survived. Loss. Disappointment. Decades of grind. Years of loneliness. His wife. His own worst thoughts. He didn't feel wise. He felt tired. But maybe there was wisdom in that, too. He pushed himself up again, slower this time, and walked to the garage. He opened the door. The mower sat where he'd left it, frame intact, wiring exposed, tools scattered around like abandoned soldiers. He stepped inside. The air smelled like old grease and sawdust. He picked up the wrench and turned it in his hand. Then he crouched. Tested a joint. Tightened a bolt. Something clicked, just a small sound, but enough. He adjusted the panel housing and noticed where the alignment was off by a fraction. He marked it with chalk. He tested the charge controller. Still dead. But something inside him had turned back on. It didn't matter if Danny texted. It didn't matter if no one watched the videos or replied to the forums. Not today. He was here. And that was enough. For now. A few hours passed without him noticing. His fingers worked slow but steady, his mind focused. He was back in his element, puzzle solving, not for the world but for himself. At noon, the doorbell rang. It startled him. He wiped his hands on his pants, walked slowly to the door, and opened it. It was Dr. Kaufman, his primary care physician, dressed in jeans and a windbreaker. "Frank," he said with a smile, "thought I'd drop by. Haven't seen you since your checkup in January." Frank squinted. "Something wrong?" "No, no," Kaufman said quickly. "Just making the rounds. You were on my mind." Frank stepped aside and let him in. They sat at the kitchen table, the doctor asking about blood pressure, sleep, diet. Frank gave short answers. Kaufman hesitated, then said, "You know, Frank, a lot of folks your age start to slow down. That's not a bad thing. It's part of the process." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Is that what this is? A warning to sit down and wait to die?" Kaufman chuckled awkwardly. "No, of course not. Just, don't push yourself too hard. There's no shame in taking it easy." Frank looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "Taking it easy is what almost killed me." Kaufman frowned, unsure what to say. After a moment, he stood. "Just be careful. That's all." Frank nodded politely and watched him leave. When the door closed, he returned to the garage, shaking his head. Take it easy. Easy didn't build rockets. Easy didn't fix broken things. Easy didn't make him feel alive. That night, he sat in the garage again, the tablet propped on a stool, YouTube open. Another Musk clip. "Comfort is the enemy of progress," Elon said. "The day you stop chasing discomfort, you stop growing." Frank whispered to the screen, "Then maybe I've still got some growing to do." He stood slowly, bones creaking. The mower wasn't finished. But it was closer. He was closer. And that was enough to come back tomorrow. It started with a checklist. Frank Delaney had always trusted lists. They helped quiet the noise in his head, gave shape to chaos, and turned overwhelming projects into manageable pieces. That morning, after a night of tossing and half-sleeping, he sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a ballpoint pen and wrote at the top, "Mower Rebuild, Phase 1. Beneath it, he started listing every part he would need: new lithium-ion battery, charge controller, replacement wiring harness, soldering kit, 3D printed brackets to stabilize the solar array. The list grew quickly. He flipped to a second page, then a third. And with every line, something in him straightened. This wasn't a fantasy. This wasn't a hobby. This was a project. A plan. A rebuild of more than just a failed machine. At the bottom of the last page, he hesitated, then wrote, "Post updates. Share progress." That was the part that made his heart beat faster, not from excitement, but from dread. Because sharing meant exposing it. It meant being seen. And for someone who had spent the last 7 years trying not to be seen, that felt like peeling off armor. Still, he couldn't ignore the voice that had sparked this whole thing. Elon had said, "If your idea scares you a little, it's probably worth doing." Frank underlined the last line. Then he stood up, went to the garage, and got to work. That day, he ordered the battery. The good one. Not the cheap version. He watched tutorial videos on soldering solar lines and how to balance voltages between parallel cells. He joined another online forum, this one more active, and lurked silently, reading threads from other makers, builders, tinkerers. Most were younger. Some just kids. But they spoke a language he understood: trial and error, small wins, stubborn commitment. And then he did the thing he never thought he would. He took a photo of the mower, angled just right, to make it look half respectable, then wrote, "Reviving a 30-year-old solar mower concept. Retired machinist. Open to feedback. Trying to finish what I started." He posted it. No fanfare. Just clicked send and closed the browser. He spent the next hour rechecking wire paths in the garage, acting like he didn't care. But he did. He cared. More than he expected. He came back inside, reopened the tab, and saw it. Comments. Real ones. Dozens. This is awesome. What year was the original build? Subscribing to follow progress. My granddad would love this, gonna show him. One person had even said, this reminds me of something Elon Musk said about never giving up on an idea just because time passed. Keep going, man. Frank sat back in his chair, stunned. These weren't pity comments. They weren't calling him cute or old or outdated. They were calling him a builder. A creator. A man with something to contribute. And that changed everything. Over the next week, the garage transformed from a dusty tomb into a lab. The smell of solder and scorched plastic returned to the air. His fingers, once stiff and slow, started to move with old precision. His posture shifted. He found himself humming while working, whistling absent-mindedly when the sun hit the windows just right. He printed out wiring diagrams and pinned them to the corkboard. He added LED lighting to the garage ceiling. He even found a Bluetooth speaker in a drawer and started playing ambient instrumental music. Nothing fancy, just sound to fill the quiet. Each morning, he wrote down 3 things, one task for the mower, one thing he was curious about, and one thing that scared him. One morning, the task was, mount solar panels. The curiosity, can this thing power a trimmer too? The fear, what if it doesn't work? He wrote it anyway. Acknowledged it. Then got to work. That small ritual, repeated daily, became his compass. One day, the doorbell rang and it was the delivery guy with the lithium-ion battery pack. Frank signed for it and grinned like a kid on Christmas. The thing weighed less than he expected, but it packed serious capacity. He carried it like treasure into the garage and placed it on the workbench with reverence. He filmed the unboxing. Not for anyone else, at least not yet, but for himself. To mark the moment. That night, he posted another update, battery arrived. Starting wiring tomorrow. Haven't felt this energized in years. Not sure if the mower will run, but I'm running again, and that counts for something. Within hours, more responses. Rooting for you. My dad's following your build now too. Man, this is inspiring. And then a private message from a guy named Evan, mid-30s, engineer in Arizona. If you get stuck with the battery config, let me know, I've done a couple solar retrofits. Frank replied, cautious at first. But Evan was kind, direct, and genuinely interested. Over the next few days, they traded messages, schematics, troubleshooting tips. It was strange at first, talking to someone so young, so tech-savvy. But the language of problem-solving didn't care about age. Frank realized something, he wasn't just working on a project. He was entering a community. One that valued ideas more than birth years. He asked Evan, eventually, how'd you get into solar? Evan replied, honestly. Elon Musk. His stuff changed how I thought about energy. Still does. Frank smiled. Of course it came back to him. The spark. The push. The reason Frank had walked into the garage again in the first place. He watched another clip late that night. Elon sitting on a stage, answering a student's question, what advice would you give someone who thinks it's too late to start over? Elon leaned forward, eyes locked. You're only too late if you decide to be. Time is a tool, not a wall. Use it. Frank whispered to himself, time is a tool. He said it again, like a mantra. And it stuck. He went to bed that night with a full battery charging in the garage and a heart carrying a quiet kind of hope. The kind that doesn't yell, doesn't demand, but sits in your chest and says, let's try again. A few days later, while testing the charging circuit, Frank hit a snag. The controller readout was off. The current wasn't flowing right. He stared at the wiring for an hour. His hands trembled. Not from fear, but from frustration. He had hit a wall. The same kind that made him give up in '94. He could feel the old voices creeping back in. What's the point? You're not an engineer. You're a fossil. Just stop. He almost did. Almost packed up the tools and sat down in the recliner again. But then, as if by instinct, he opened the tablet and recorded a message. I've been at this for hours. Something's not lining up. I feel like I'm spinning my wheels. But I promised myself I'd finish this. Not because it has to be perfect. Because I have to prove to myself I'm not done yet. So if anyone out there's hit a wall before, keep pushing. That's what I'm gonna do. He posted it before he could change his mind. That night, dozens of messages came in. Not solutions, just encouragement. You've got this. Happens to all of us. Wall today, breakthrough tomorrow. Frank read each one, eyes blurry but heart wide open. He slept better than he had in months. And in the morning, he found the problem. A reversed polarity wire. Stupid mistake. Simple fix. But it only mattered because he kept going. That small correction turned the whole system live. The solar panel lit the battery controller. The controller fed voltage into the motor. The mower frame shook slightly, then spun its wheels for the first time in decades. Frank jumped. Then laughed. Then cried, quietly, alone in the garage with the morning sun pouring in. He whispered, "We're back." Not just the mower. Him. He was back. He opened the forum, posted a short clip. Just 10 seconds. Mower spinning. Caption, "It's alive." Reactions poured in. But he didn't need them this time. He smiled, shut off the motor, sat on the bench, and whispered something to himself he hadn't said in years, "I'm proud of you, Frank." And he meant it. The moment didn't come with fireworks or fanfare. There was no applause, no cheering crowd, no triumphant music swelling in the background. It happened in a quiet driveway, under a sky smudged with autumn clouds, as Frank Delaney rolled his solar mower into the sunlight for the first real test run. He stood next to the machine, now fully rebuilt, wires tucked, casing cleaned and polished, solar panels gleaming like something pulled from the future. The neighbors weren't outside. The street was silent except for a few birds chattering from a pine tree. But to Frank, it felt like a stage. A sacred moment. He took a breath and flipped the power switch. A hum filled the air, low and steady, like the machine was clearing its throat after a long, silent slumber. The wheels turned slowly, then steadied. The blade motor engaged, a soft whir. Frank stood behind it, hands on the bars, heart thudding like a teenager's on a first date. And then, he pushed. The mower moved forward, smoothly, powered entirely by the sun. Grass gave way beneath its blade. The sound was perfect. Controlled. Clean. Not a puff of exhaust. Not a drop of fuel. Just motion and purpose. Frank laughed, short and sharp. He mowed a clean line across the front yard. Then another. Then a third. Each one straighter than the last. He was sweating, breath coming faster, but he didn't stop. The old push mower from the '90s had become something new. Not just in design, but in meaning. He had built this. Not just once, but again. After loss. After grief. After years of silence. He had come back. And the machine, faithful and steady, had come with him. By the time he finished the front yard, a neighbor had come out to watch. Then another. Then Mrs. Harper from across the street, arms folded over her sweater, said, "Well, I'll be. Is that thing electric?" Frank nodded, breathless. Solar. She walked across the lawn, inspecting it like a judge at a county fair. "That's the cleanest cut I've seen on this block in years." Frank beamed. She looked him over. "You build that yourself?" Tried to, he said. Tried 30 years ago and gave up. Finally figured it out. She whistled low. You should be on the news. He shrugged. Just happy it runs. But inside, he felt something blooming, quiet pride mixed with something deeper. Not just that it worked. But that it mattered. That he mattered. That afternoon, he uploaded a short video to the forum. Just him walking behind the mower, sunlight flashing off the panels. Caption, first cut in 30 years. It works. Within hours, the responses flooded in. Hundreds. Then thousands. This is the coolest thing I've seen all week. You just made my dad cry. He's 68 and always wanted to build something. You should post this on Twitter, Elon might see it. Frank read each comment slowly, like they were letters from an old friend. One stuck with him, my name's Marcus. I'm 22 and studying mechanical engineering. I almost dropped out this year. Watching your video made me stay. Frank stared at it for a long time. Then replied, you've got time. Don't waste it. He didn't expect what happened next. The next morning, a message appeared in his inbox from a tech blog editor named Nina Garcia. Hi Frank, I saw your mower video on the Maker Forum. Any chance you'd be willing to do an interview? Your story is powerful, and I think a lot of people need to hear it. Frank nearly deleted the message. He wasn't looking for attention. But something about it stuck. He asked himself the same question that had been rattling around his head for weeks, what if this isn't just about the mower? What if this is about giving people permission? He replied. A week later, the article went live. The man who finished what he started, a retired machinist builds a solar mower, and a new life. It went viral. Thousands of shares. Comments from around the world. Former engineers. Grieving widows. Kids whose grandparents had once built model planes in the garage. They all said the same thing, you've inspired me. You've reminded me. You've given me hope. Frank sat in his kitchen, tablet glowing, scrolling through messages with eyes full of quiet tears. He didn't cry often. But this wasn't sadness. This was something else. Release. Redemption. Then came the message that made him drop his coffee cup. A blue checkmark. Verified. A reply to the Twitter post someone had tagged him in. It was from Elon Musk. 3 words, this is awesome. Frank blinked at the screen. Read it again. This is awesome. No fanfare. No corporate PR. Just Elon, the man whose voice had pulled Frank out of the darkness, acknowledging him like a fellow builder. He took a screenshot, unsure if anyone would believe it. He didn't care. He knew it was real. Later that day, Evan messaged him. Dude. Elon replied to your post. That's insane. You okay? Frank just wrote back, better than okay. Then he added, thanks for helping me figure out the wiring. Evan replied, man, thank you. You helped me believe old ideas still matter. Frank leaned back in his chair and looked around the room. Same furniture. Same kitchen table. Same quiet street. But everything had changed. Not outside, but inside him. That night, he took the long walk to the garage, stood in the doorway, and whispered, thank you, Marlene. For hanging those blueprints. For believing this mattered. He didn't believe in ghosts, but in that moment, he felt something. A presence. A peace. He walked to the workbench, picked up a pencil, and wrote on the whiteboard above the pegboard, next project. He smiled. Not because he had the answer. But because he was finally asking the question again. And that was everything. The next morning, he got up early, made coffee, and sat down to write. Not on the legal pad, but on a blog he'd just started. He called it Late Bloom Garage. His first post was titled, "Finishing What I Started." In it, he told the story. Not to brag. Not to go viral again. But to tell someone, anyone, that it's never too late to matter. He ended the post with this: "If you're reading this and thinking you've missed your moment, I'm telling you now, you haven't. I started over at 72. You can start today. Don't wait. The world needs what only you can build." And for the first time in decades, Frank felt not just useful, but seen. Understood. Connected. He wasn't fixing things alone anymore. He was part of something. A movement. A quiet revolution of late bloomers, stubborn builders, and forgotten creators who finally realized the truth: they were never too old. Just waiting for permission to begin again. Frank never expected that a blog with a plain white background and a hand-drawn logo would bring people into his life, but there it was. Late Bloom Garage had over 40,000 visitors in the first 3 days. People weren't just reading, they were writing back. His inbox flooded with messages from old welders in Ohio, grandmothers in Texas who used to repair radios, a woman in Oregon who'd kept her husband's lathe covered in a tarp for years, unsure what to do with it until she read his story. They all said the same thing in different ways: "I didn't think I had anything left to offer, until I saw you hadn't quit." Frank sat in his garage reading one of the letters on his tablet, a long message from a man named Louis, 76, who had worked as an aircraft technician for most of his life but had shut everything down after his wife passed. Louis wrote, "Your mower woke something up in me. I went into the shed today and turned on the old drill press. For 10 minutes, I remembered who I was." Frank didn't know how to reply. So he just typed, "Thank you for telling me. Keep building." He stared at that sentence for a long time before pressing send. It was simple. Maybe too simple. But it was honest. Outside, clouds gathered, threatening a soft autumn rain, but Frank didn't mind. He stood from his stool and turned back to the workbench. The mower was done, but he wasn't finished. He looked at the whiteboard where he'd scribbled "next project," and underneath it, a few half-baked ideas were starting to take form. Solar trimmer. Rain barrel pump. Bike with assist motor. But the one that held his attention was circled twice: Community Garage Day. He'd written it almost as a joke the night he launched the blog. He imagined a group of folks, gray hair, bent backs, and stubborn hearts, meeting in one garage to work on forgotten projects and teach each other again. But maybe it didn't have to be a joke. Maybe it could be real. He knew plenty of people in his town who had once worked with their hands, people who now spent most of their time watching game shows and waiting for doctor appointments. What if they could build again? Share again? Frank shook his head. It was too much, too soon. He wasn't a leader. He was just a guy with a soldering iron and a garage full of second chances. Still, the idea didn't leave him. That evening, he wrote a short post on the blog, thinking about starting something local. A garage day. Nothing big. Just people who used to build things helping each other remember how. Let me know if you'd come. He hit publish, walked away, and didn't check the site again until the next morning. When he did, his eyes went wide. Over 600 responses. Not all local, of course, but many nearby. A man from 2 towns over said, "I've got tools, a table saw, and time. Say the word." A retired school shop teacher from across the state said, "I miss working with kids. I'll bring my portable vise." One woman simply wrote, "You're doing what I didn't have the courage to start. Please keep going." Frank exhaled slowly. It wasn't a maybe anymore. It was a yes. That week, he drove down to the local hardware store, spoke to the manager, and asked if they had a spare section of the lot they'd be willing to let him use for a Saturday gathering. "Nothing fancy," Frank said. "Just a few tables, maybe a folding canopy or two, and a lot of old stories." The manager grinned. Frank, I remember you from back in the day. You helped my dad fix our sprinkler system when I was 9. You tell me what you need, and we'll make it happen. By Thursday, they'd set a date, October 14th. Frank started calling it the Backyard Builders Meetup. He made a flyer, just black text on white paper with a sketch of a wrench crossed with a sun, and printed 50 copies at the library. He drove around town posting them in diners, barbershops, churches, and the bulletin board at the local post office. He didn't know who would come. He didn't care. It felt right. It felt real. That night, he sat in the garage, staring at the mower again, not with the stress of unfinished work but the calm pride of something completed. Then his phone buzzed. It was a new email from a local news station. Saw your story. Would love to film a segment on your solar mower and the Garage Day event. Available to meet? Frank nearly dropped the phone. He stared at it, unsure if he should reply. He wasn't a public speaker. He didn't have polished sound bites or an angle. He was just an old machinist who refused to fade. Still, he replied, yes. Let's talk. The next morning, they sent a reporter, a young woman named Claire who shook his hand firmly and walked around the garage in quiet awe. You did all this yourself? She asked. Took me a few decades, he said with a smile. But yeah. Finished it last month. She filmed as he rolled the mower into the driveway and explained how the solar panels fed the lithium battery, how the custom wiring rerouted peak voltage to the controller, and how it finally ran the blade without fuel or fumes. She asked why he decided to start over after all these years. He didn't quote Elon. He didn't rehearse anything. He just said, I thought it was over for me. But turns out, I just needed a reason to try again. She nodded slowly. And now you're helping others try too? He looked at the flyer for Garage Day tacked to the wall and said, I hope so. The segment aired that weekend. Frank didn't watch it live. He was in the garage, cleaning off tables and prepping extension cords. But his neighbor came running across the lawn at 6:42 p.m. with her phone in hand, shouting, You're on TV. By Sunday, more people had signed up to come. By Wednesday, the hardware store had cleared extra space in the lot and donated 10 folding chairs. Someone from the retirement community even called and said, Would you mind if our van brought a few residents over? Some of them used to be real craftsmen. Frank just laughed. Bring them all. We've got space. The night before the event, he stood in the garage, lights dim, tools put away, and whispered something he hadn't said aloud in years. Thank you, Elon. Not because Musk saved him. Not because of the tweet. But because the mindset. That wild refusal to accept limits, the insistence that age is no excuse, that failure is a stepping stone, had lodged itself in Frank's bones and pulled him forward. The next morning, the sky was blue and crisp, the kind of fall air that makes you believe in new beginnings. People came. Dozens. Then more. Some rolled in tool carts. Others brought old radios, broken lamps, cracked guitar amps, busted drills. There were war stories told over coffee and solder smoke. A retired nurse helped rewire an old toaster. A teenage girl brought her grandfather and watched in awe as he explained gear ratios. Someone brought donuts. Someone else brought a portable speaker and played old jazz. Frank stood near the edge of it all, stunned. Laughing. Grinning. Eyes misty. They had come. Not for him. Not for the mower. But for themselves. For each other. For a reminder that they weren't done yet. That legacy wasn't something you left behind, it was something you built every day you dared to keep going. That night, he wrote one last post, Garage Day was a success. Not because we fixed everything. But because we remembered we could. Age doesn't mean stop. It means carry. And when we carry together, we don't just fix machines, we fix parts of ourselves. He closed the laptop and sat in silence, listening to the hum of the world outside. He wasn't alone anymore. He was part of something. And it was just getting started. 3 days after the first backyard builders meetup, Frank received a letter in the mail, not an email, not a comment, but an actual letter, thick envelope, airmail stamp, postmarked from Wisconsin. He sat at the kitchen table with a hot cup of tea, turning it over slowly before opening it, his name handwritten in neat block letters. Inside was a 2-page note from a man named Dave Norwood. Frank had to reread the first line twice. Frank, I don't know if you remember me, but we worked together in '88 on the Fleet Core lawn battery prototype. A memory unfurled like a paper map. Dave, tall, wiry, always chewing on a toothpick, was a wiring specialist brought in for 6 weeks to help with the test board. They'd spent countless nights arguing over circuits, sketching solutions on diner napkins, and swearing they'd change the future of backyard tools. Then the project was shelved, and the team scattered. The letter continued, I saw the clip of your solar mower on the local station's website. I couldn't believe it. I watched it 5 times. You did it, man. You actually did it. Frank held the page tighter, stunned, as if the letter might disappear if he blinked. Dave had gone on to teach at a small technical college, had a few patents to his name, but he admitted that something about Frank's story hit a nerve. He wrote, I kept telling myself I'd get back to building for fun, but life rolled on. Now I'm 74, and watching you cut your lawn with that machine, we built that spirit together. I just didn't finish it. You did. I'm proud of you. And damn it, I'm dusting off my old bench this weekend. Frank folded the letter slowly and held it against his chest. The words were heavier than he expected. Not because of guilt. But because of something else, kinship. Completion. The idea that maybe none of this had been wasted after all. Not the delays. Not the grief. Not the years in the dark. It had all led to this, a message from a man who reminded him he hadn't been dreaming alone. That afternoon, Frank returned to the garage and opened one of the old boxes Marlene had labeled Archive, Keep. Inside were scribbled notes, engineering pads filled with diagrams, and a dusty Fleet Core folder with faded printouts. He pulled one out, a drawing of a drive belt tensioner he had designed and abandoned. He smiled. It was junk. But it was his junk. And now, maybe it was more than that. Maybe it was a breadcrumb for someone else to follow. He pulled out a large manila envelope and started collecting pages, cleaning them gently with a dry cloth, assembling a package. He added a handwritten note, Dave, here's what I kept. Maybe there's something in here that sparks something in you. Let's not lose this again. He mailed it that evening, walking the envelope down to the drop box himself. He stood there a while after dropping it in, staring up at the telephone wires, remembering the way he and Dave used to joke that power should fall like rain, free, quiet, and everywhere. Frank smiled. Still could, maybe, he said out loud to no one. Over the next week, messages came from even farther away, Utah, Tennessee, Vancouver, even Ireland. A man named Aiden had written, I just turned 70. My grandson showed me your mower. We're now working on building a solar-powered go-kart together. That one got to Frank. He stared at the words, together, and grandson, like they were gospel. He tried not to think about the empty chairs in his life, his daughter who hadn't called in years, his granddaughter he'd only seen in photos. He told himself not to dwell. But the truth was, every project he finished, every blog post he wrote, every message he received, it all kept echoing in the same space, the hollow where his family used to be. And the echoes were growing louder. One evening, he stood looking at an old photo of his daughter when she was 7, kneeling next to the mower, back when it was still just parts and ambition. Her hair in pigtails. Grease on her cheek. He hadn't thought of that moment in years. The photo had been taped to the fridge once, but after the funeral, after all the silence that followed, it ended up in the junk drawer. Frank didn't talk much about his daughter. He wasn't sure what to say. They hadn't fought exactly. But when Marlene died, something broke between them, like they both expected the other to carry the grief. And when he turned inward, she moved on. He didn't call. She didn't write. One day turned into 7 years. He had checked on her once online, saw she'd moved to Austin, married, had a daughter. That was all. But now, holding the photo, he whispered, maybe it's time. That night, he wrote a letter. Not an email. Not a text. An actual letter, the way Marlene would have done. Dear Sarah, he began. I saw a picture of you the other day, holding a wrench next to the mower. I'd forgotten how much fun we used to have in the garage. I wanted you to know I finally finished it. The mower. It runs on sunlight now. No gas. No fumes. Just light and wires and the will to keep going. I don't expect anything from this. But I thought maybe you'd like to know that your old man finally made good on a promise. If you ever want to see it, the garage door's open. He signed it, Dad, and included the web address to Late Bloom Garage. He mailed it the next morning. Then he waited. Not with expectation. Just with hope. The kind that doesn't demand but stays quietly awake. Days passed. Then a week. Then another. He kept building. Posted a new blog entry about converting old ceiling fans into wind-powered battery chargers. Made a short video showing how he tested voltage drop over long cable runs using a spool he'd found in the shed. And then one evening, just as he was locking up the garage, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated. Answered. A voice, soft, cautious. Hi, is this Frank Delaney? Speaking. Silence. Then, it's Sarah. His knees buckled slightly, and he grabbed the edge of the workbench. He didn't speak. Couldn't. She cleared her throat. I got your letter. And I read the blog. All of it. More silence. Then, softer, I'm proud of you, Dad. His throat tightened. I didn't know if you'd read it. She laughed lightly. Mom would have made me. He laughed too, a shaky sound, more air than joy, but it was enough. She continued, we've got a trip to Dallas next month. Thought maybe we could swing by. Just for a bit. If that's okay. Frank looked at the mower. At the clean tools. At the photo now pinned proudly to the corkboard. That'd be more than okay, he said. When the call ended, he stood in the garage, lights still humming, alone and not alone, heart cracked wide open. He whispered, Marlene. I think we're getting her back. The next morning, he opened the blog editor and started writing. Title, Letters Matter. In it, he told the story, not of reconciliation, not yet, but of risk. Of saying the thing you've wanted to say before it's too late. He ended it with this, maybe the most important thing you build in your life won't have wires or gears. Maybe it's a bridge. Write the letter. Make the call. Open the garage door. Sometimes, the breakthrough isn't in the machine. It's in the silence you finally break. That post was shared more than any other. Comments poured in. Just wrote to my brother after 20 years. I mailed my dad a photo of his old boat. He called me in tears. I thought I was alone. Thank you for reminding me I'm not. And Frank, sitting in the same chair where he once thought his story was over, realized that this wasn't about going viral. It was about going home. He didn't know what the visit with Sarah would be like. He didn't expect a miracle. But he had opened the door. And sometimes, that's all it takes. The day they were set to arrive, Frank cleaned his house in a way he hadn't since Marlene was alive. Not because it was dirty, He'd always kept it tidy, a kind of quiet discipline, but because he wanted to offer something better than tidy. He wanted to offer warmth, welcome, intention. He dusted picture frames, rearranged the cushions on the couch, wiped the fingerprints off the microwave door, and even changed the curtain in the guest room, though he wasn't sure if they'd stay. He set out fresh towels, laid out a small plate of oatmeal cookies, Sarah's favorite when she was little, and brewed a full pot of coffee, though he usually only drank 1 cup a day. It wasn't nerves exactly. It was something deeper. Anticipation laced with fragile hope. He kept glancing at the clock, then at the street through the living room window. He'd told himself not to expect anything. But now that the day had come, it felt like every second ticked a little louder. At 2:14 p.m., a silver SUV turned onto the street. Frank watched it slow near the mailbox, pause, and then pull into the driveway. He stood, hands suddenly clammy, heart hammering in his chest. The car door opened. Sarah stepped out. Time compressed and expanded all at once. She looked older, of course. Her hair was shorter, streaked with silver near the temples. But her posture, the way she held her chin when uncertain, that was still the same. Then a child stepped out from the back seat. A girl, maybe 11, maybe 12, wearing sneakers with untied laces and a backpack shaped like a fox. Frank stared. His granddaughter. His own blood. She looked around, squinting against the sun, then spotted him in the window. She waved. Just like that. A simple, casual wave. Frank opened the door and stepped outside. The breeze was cool, rustling the trees gently, the smell of cut grass drifting in from next door. Sarah approached slowly, cautiously, and stopped a few feet away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Frank swallowed hard. "You look like your mother," he said softly. Sarah nodded. "You still smell like motor oil," she said, her voice cracking. And then, suddenly, they were hugging. Not a perfect, cinematic hug, no orchestral swell, no dramatic tears. But a real one. Tight. Honest. Long overdue. Frank felt her shoulder tremble. Or maybe it was his. The granddaughter lingered behind them, awkward, curious. Sarah pulled back and said, "Dad, this is Josie." Frank turned. "Hi there." Josie gave him a thumbs up. "My mom says you built a lawn mower that runs on space energy." Frank laughed. "Close enough. Want to see it?" She nodded enthusiastically. Sarah glanced at him. "You sure? I've been waiting a long time to show someone." He led them around to the garage, where everything was still arranged from the last time he worked. Mower in its place, tools clean, cables coiled, the whiteboard now featuring a list of ideas labeled "Future Builds." Josie walked around the mower slowly. "It's got solar panels on top." "Yep. Collects light, turns it into power. No gas needed. Just sunshine and stubbornness." She knelt to look closer. "It's cooler than the robots in our science lab." Frank grinned. High praise. Sarah wandered the garage with slower steps. She paused at the corkboard where photos and plans had been pinned. She stared at the one of her as a child, crouched beside the early prototype. Her hand went to her mouth. Frank said quietly, "I kept it in a drawer for too long. Should have had it on the wall years ago." She didn't respond right away. "Then, I didn't think you remembered that day." "I remember all of them," he said. "Especially the ones I didn't get right." Sarah looked at him. "I didn't call because I didn't know what to say." "Same," he replied. "I thought I'd already said too much, or not enough." And then time just kept going. She nodded. "I'm sorry, Dad." Frank stepped closer. "Me too." They stood in the quiet for a moment, the sounds of the world muffled by the garage's dusty peace. Then Josie piped up, "Can we turn it on?" Frank chuckled. "Of course." He flipped the switch, and the mower came to life, the hum soft and steady. Josie clapped. "That's so cool. Can I push it?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Stay on the driveway. It's a little strong." She guided it forward, carefully, with Frank beside her. Sarah watched from the garage doorway, arms crossed but smiling. That evening, they stayed for dinner. Just simple spaghetti and garlic bread, but it tasted better than any meal Frank could remember in years. Conversation was tentative at first, but warmed over time, updates on life, on school, on books Josie liked, on the job Sarah had taken as a freelance editor. After Mom passed, she said, "I didn't know how to deal with the house. Every room was filled with her. I felt like I couldn't breathe in it." Frank nodded, listening, letting the truth settle. "I should have come to you," she said. "You were grieving too. But I just shut the door." "I shut mine too," Frank said. "Sometimes I still forget it's allowed to be open." They sat in silence after that, not uncomfortable, just full. Then Josie asked, "Grandpa Frank, can I come to your next garage day thing?" Frank raised his eyebrows. "You'd want to?" "Heck yeah. I want to build something." Sarah smiled. "She's been tinkering with an old toaster for weeks." "You'll fit right in," Frank said. After they left, he stood in the driveway for a long while, watching the SUV's taillights vanish down the street. The air was cool, stars just starting to appear. He didn't go back inside right away. Instead, he walked into the garage, turned on the light, and sat at the bench. Everything looked the same. But he didn't feel the same. Something had shifted. Not just in the reunion, but in the realization that repair wasn't just for machines. It was for people, too. Relationships. Families. Even when you think the wires are too frayed, the current can still run. If you're willing to connect again. The next morning, he opened the blog and wrote a new post titled, "Wires We Can't See." He described the visit, not every detail, just enough to capture the truth of it. He ended the post with this: "Machines are honest. If you give them power, they run. People are harder. They carry memories, pride, silence. But they need connection just the same. I used to think I was waiting for forgiveness. But maybe I was just waiting for the courage to ask for it." The comments rolled in again. Dozens. Then hundreds. One from a woman who'd been estranged from her son for 15 years. Another from a man whose father had passed before he'd ever said, "I'm proud of you." Another from a woman who hadn't spoken to her sister since their mother died. Frank read each one with quiet reverence. Not because he had all the answers. But because he knew what it meant to feel forgotten. And now he knew what it meant to be found. Later that afternoon, he started sketching a new design. This one wasn't a machine, it was a small folding solar light that could be built with under $20 in parts, intended for kids and parents to assemble together. He called it the bridge light. Not because it would light a path, but because it might help build one. He didn't know if anyone would make it. But he knew it mattered. Just like the letters. Just like the wave from the driveway. Just like the old picture now back on the wall. He sat back, hands resting on the table, and whispered something to the empty room. "We're just getting started." The morning sunlight spilled across Frank's garage like honey, catching on the polished edge of a screwdriver and glinting off the small solar panel he'd been soldering the night before. The place had never looked better, clean, alive, humming with momentum. In just a few months, what was once a room of regrets and rust had become a workshop of ideas and new beginnings. He sipped his coffee slowly, flipping through a notebook filled with sketches and notes, when the ping of a new email broke the silence. He wiped his hands on a rag and checked his tablet. The sender's name nearly made him drop his mug. It was from a representative at Neuralink, part of Elon Musk's team. The subject line read simply, "We saw what you built." Frank's hands trembled slightly as he opened it. The message was brief but clear, an invitation to attend a senior innovation roundtable in Austin, hosted by several of Musk's companies, aimed at showcasing and amplifying late-life inventors and builders. "We believe age is not a ceiling but a platform," it read. "Your story embodies the mindset we want to share with the world." The letter ended with a personal note from someone on Musk's team. Elon saw the solar mower clip. He smiled and said, "This guy gets it." He didn't ask for permission to matter again. Frank sat back, stunned. He read it twice, then a third time. His jaw tightened, not with pride, but with something deeper, a sense of surreal gratitude. Not because Elon Musk had acknowledged him, but because somewhere, somehow, the echo of what he had built in solitude had reached someone. It reminded him of the old days of radio, how you could sit in a dark room and send a signal into the void, never knowing who might be listening. And now, he knew someone had been. That afternoon, he called Sarah. "You sitting down?" he asked. She laughed. "I'm driving." "But go ahead." He told her everything. The invitation, the event in Austin, the possibility of meeting others who had also come back to life through invention. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Dad, that's incredible." "I know," he said. "I don't know what I'd even say at something like that." "Just say what you always say. Show them what you built. And maybe bring the wrench you're always carrying like a badge of honor." Frank laughed. "You noticed that? It's in every picture. It's a good wrench." "Then take it with you," she said. "And take a picture with Elon. Josie will never let you hear the end of it if you don't." Frank paused, his voice catching slightly. "Would you two want to come with me? I know it's a lot." "But, of course," Sarah said immediately. "Of course we would." They arrived in Austin on a cool Friday morning. The event was held in a tech hub on the outskirts of the city, a sleek white building with glass walls and robotic arms moving silently behind protective screens. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed, not with the self-importance Frank had feared, but with genuine curiosity. Tables lined the open space, each with seniors showing off inventions, retrofits, hand-built drones, recycled energy systems, and even one woman who had converted her walker into a mobile charging station. Frank stood at his booth, the solar mower shining under LED lights, next to a trifold display Sarah had helped him design. Josie had even drawn the logo, a sun smiling down on a lawn mower with tiny bolts for eyes. People stopped. They asked questions. One young engineer leaned in and said, "You did this yourself?" Frank nodded. "Took me a while. A few decades, give or take." The young man grinned. "You just proved half of my college professors wrong." "Good," Frank said. "They probably needed it." Midway through the afternoon, a woman with a tablet approached. "Mr. Delaney? Elon's about to do a walkthrough. He asked if he could stop at your station." Frank blinked. "Sure," he said, like he wasn't shocked to his core. Minutes later, there he was, Elon Musk, dressed casually, walking with a small group of staff and engineers. He moved slower than Frank expected, more thoughtful, his eyes constantly scanning, absorbing. When he reached Frank's booth, he smiled. "So, you're the solar mower guy." Frank offered his hand. "Guilty as charged." Elon shook it. "This is brilliant. Old tech made new. You didn't wait for permission. That's the mindset." Frank tried to respond, but the words tangled. So instead, he pointed to the machine. "It runs on light. Just like people do, I guess." Elon nodded. "Exactly. I tell people, it's not about having the most advanced tools, it's about doing something with what you've got." You kept building. Most people stop. Frank cleared his throat. I stopped for a while too. Elon tilted his head. But you started again. That's what matters. Legacy isn't what you leave behind when you die, it's what you make while you're still alive. Sarah stood nearby, her eyes shining. Josie had her phone out, trying to secretly film, though not very well. Elon noticed and said, "Get in here, kid." They all squeezed into a photo, Frank holding the wrench, Elon giving a thumbs up, Josie beaming. Later, Frank would receive a copy of that photo with a short typed note, "Keep building. You're proving what most people forget, there is no age limit on relevance." The rest of the event was a blur. Panels. Conversations. Shared meals with strangers who felt like family by nightfall. A man from Oregon showed Frank his homemade geothermal heater. A retired nurse from Florida displayed an emergency medical kit she'd designed for seniors living alone. Each story carried the same undertone: we thought we were finished. But we weren't. That evening, Frank and Sarah sat on a balcony overlooking the city, streetlights blinking below. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. "I didn't say that enough before. Maybe ever." "You just did," he replied. She looked at him. "What now?" He exhaled slowly. "I don't know. I think this is more than just the blog now. More than just fixing things. You're building people," she said. "You're waking them up." He nodded. "Maybe we could make it something bigger. A program. Traveling workshops. A place where people can come and get their hands dirty again." She smiled. "I'd help you." Yeah. I think it's time I built something with my hands, too." He didn't speak. Just looked out at the city, heart full. Not with accomplishment, but with something better, alignment. The next morning, they drove home in silence for long stretches, the kind of silence that feels safe, soft. Frank thought about the letter he'd written to Sarah. About the first time he flipped the switch on the mower. About the dusty corner of the garage where it all started. And about the moment Elon Musk had looked him in the eye and said, "Legacy is what you make while you're still alive." He opened the window, let the wind rush in. The road stretched out ahead, long and open. And somewhere deep in his soul, something whispered, "You're not just getting started anymore. You're building something no one can take away." He closed his eyes for a second and said aloud, "I was never too old. I was just waiting to believe it." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? When Frank began sketching the idea for what he called the Senior Builders Workshop, it was little more than a flicker, an inkling born from conversations, encouragement, and a restless urge to share what he'd learned. He pictured a space where people like him, those who felt lost or forgotten, could come together, reclaim their hands, and rebuild not just machines but themselves. It wasn't about fancy tools or expensive equipment. It was about connection, creativity, and courage. His garage wasn't big enough for the dream, so he started calling around. Local community centers, churches, libraries, anywhere willing to give a small corner or a few tables for a few hours a week. Most places politely declined or ignored the call. Some told him, "We don't have funding," or "Our programs are for younger people." But one day, a voice on the other end said, "We want to help. Let's meet." That voice belonged to Maggie, a coordinator at the town's senior center. When Frank walked into the center for their meeting, he was nervous. This wasn't the same world he'd lived in before. The fluorescent lights, the walls plastered with flyers for bingo nights and health screenings, the quiet hum of an air conditioner struggling against the summer heat, all felt like a different language. Maggie smiled warmly and said, "We've been looking for something like this. Something to get people off their couches and into their hands." They talked for hours. About goals, challenges, supplies, and schedules. Maggie was full of ideas, and Frank was full of memories and hope. They agreed to start small, a monthly workshop, open to all seniors, focused on simple projects using donated materials. Frank wanted to bring in his solar mower, of course, but also to teach basics, how to solder, how to read a schematic, how to think like a builder again. The announcement went out quietly at first: Senior Builders Workshop, starting next Saturday, 10 a.m. at the town senior center. Frank made flyers, stapled them to bulletin boards, and posted on local Facebook groups. He didn't expect much. But on the morning of the first workshop, the room filled faster than he'd hoped. 20 people arrived, men and women, some with canes, others with bright eyes and eager hands. The youngest was 60, the oldest 84. Among them was Edna, a retired schoolteacher with nimble fingers and a sharp wit. Carl, a former mechanic with a permanent grease stain on his right hand, and Joan, who'd lost her husband last year and was looking for something to fill the silence. Frank felt the familiar flutter of doubt: what if he wasn't the right person? What if he couldn't help them? But then he remembered Elon's words: you don't need permission to matter. He took a deep breath, stood before the group, and said, "We're here because we believe we still have things to build. Not just machines, but ourselves. Let's get started." The first project was simple: building solar lanterns from kits Frank had assembled with parts donated by a local hardware store. He showed them how to connect wires, attach solar panels, and test batteries. Some struggled, some excelled, but everyone left with a working lantern and a spark of pride. Between workshops, Frank stayed busy, recruiting volunteers, collecting materials, and answering emails from participants who wanted help or had questions. He blogged about the progress, sharing stories of transformation and resilience. The town started noticing. The local paper ran a feature titled "Senior Builders Light Up Their Lives." Frank even received a call from a nearby city asking if he'd be willing to lead a similar program there. One afternoon, as Frank packed tools into a box, Edna approached him. "You know," she said, "I thought I'd lost my mind. Sitting at home, feeling useless. But this makes me feel alive again." Frank smiled, feeling the warmth in her words settle deep in his chest. "It's not about the tools. It's about what we do with them." Joan joined in quietly: "I come here not just for the projects, but for the people. For the chance to be part of something." Carl added, "I forgot what it felt like to learn something new. To challenge myself." Frank realized this was the true power of the workshop: not just fixing things, but mending what time had frayed: purpose, pride, community. One day, while setting up for a session, Frank received a message on his blog from a woman in California. She called herself Marie and said she'd started her own senior builders workshop after reading about his story. "Your story gave me the courage to start," she wrote. "I never thought I could do something like this. Thank you." Tears welled in Frank's eyes. He replied immediately, encouraging her and offering advice. This ripple effect, of one person's courage inspiring another, felt like a new kind of legacy. Meanwhile, Frank's relationship with Sarah and Josie deepened. They attended workshops together, Sarah helping with logistics and Josie designing logos and banners. The granddaughter's enthusiasm was contagious. She even started a blog series called Josie's Junior Builders, sharing projects kids could do with their grandparents. Frank watched them with pride, thinking about how much life had changed since the visit that first brought them back together. One evening, after a long day of building and teaching, Frank sat on his porch with a notebook. He wrote down ideas for new projects: wind turbines, recycled water collectors, energy-efficient birdhouses. He imagined a traveling workshop van, stocked with tools and supplies, bringing the program to seniors in rural areas who felt even more isolated. He thought about the words Elon had shared: "Legacy is what you make while you're still alive." Frank finally understood that legacy wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about the moments of courage, the small acts of defiance against invisibility, the hands joined in creation and hope. That night, as he turned off the porch light and closed the door, he felt a quiet certainty settle in his bones. He was no longer waiting. He was building. And so were they, all of them. Because, as Elon had reminded him, they were just getting started. The senior builder's workshop was gaining momentum, people were showing up, projects were moving forward, and Frank felt the steady pulse of hope beating stronger in his chest each day. But just as any good story demands, the rising arc met its challenge. One damp spring morning, as Frank unlocked the senior center's doors, he found the notice taped to the bulletin board: official, cold, and final, due to budget cuts, the senior builder's workshop is suspended indefinitely. The words felt like a punch to the gut. Frank stood frozen, staring at the paper, the hum of the air conditioner suddenly sharp and unforgiving in the silent hallway. It wasn't just the workshop closing. It was the weight of rejection, the dismissal that so many seniors feared, a reminder that their time, their efforts, were often seen as expendable. The news spread quickly. At the next gathering, Frank faced a room heavy with disappointment. Edna's eyes shimmered with tears, Joan's hands trembled as she folded her knitting, Carl's usual easy smile was gone. They looked to Frank for answers, for hope, but even he felt the sting of doubt creeping in. "We can't let this be the end," Frank said, voice steady but soft. "This is just a setback. It's not who we are." But inside, he wondered, was it true? Had the world already decided that seniors didn't matter? That reinvention was a luxury only the young could afford? That night, Frank sat alone in his garage, the solar mower silent and still. He traced his fingers over the worn wrench he always carried, the one Elon had noticed. He thought about all the emails from people like Marie in California, the laughter and discoveries in the workshops, the way Sarah and Josie had thrown themselves into the cause. He felt the weight of it all, the vulnerability of a dream threatened by forces beyond his control. Then, as if summoned by his unrest, his phone buzzed, a notification from a podcast he followed. The episode was a recent interview with Elon Musk, titled, "The Power of Persistence." Frank pressed play. Elon's voice filled the room, calm and unwavering. "Failure is part of the process. If you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. And when the world says no, that's often a sign you're onto something important. You can't let rejection define you. You have to define yourself." The word struck deep. Frank closed his eyes and felt a fire reignite. "Define yourself," he whispered. The next morning, he called Maggie at the senior center. "We need to talk," he said. They met in her cramped office filled with stacks of paperwork and faded photographs of past events. "I know the budget cuts are real," Frank began. "But maybe there's another way. What if we found a partner? A business, a nonprofit, anyone willing to sponsor or co-host? This can't die." Maggie nodded slowly. "I've thought about it. But the problem is bigger than money. It's about priorities." Frank didn't flinch. "Then we change priorities." Over the next weeks, Frank and Maggie reached out to local businesses, city council members, and nonprofits. They pitched the idea relentlessly. Frank spoke not just about the workshop but about what it symbolized: hope, relevance, the untapped potential of seniors who refused to fade away. Some doors slammed. Others cracked open just a little. The breakthrough came unexpectedly from an old friend, Tom, who ran a hardware store and had supported the workshop with parts donations. "I'm in," Tom said. "Let's get you a space in the back of the store. We'll call it, the workshop at Tom's." It wasn't a senior center, but it was a place. Real, tangible, alive. Frank threw himself into setting up the new workshop, recruiting volunteers and gathering tools. The news spread quickly. People who had given up hope found their way back. The first night at Tom's, Frank stood in the midst of familiar faces and new ones, the scent of sawdust and motor oil filling the air. Edna held up a small solar lantern, smiling like she'd won a prize. Joan shared stories about the projects she wanted to try next. Carl joked about fixing a classic car engine. Frank felt the pulse again, stronger, more defiant. But the fight wasn't over. One evening, while working late on a prototype wind turbine, Frank's phone rang. It was Sarah. "Dad," she said, voice urgent, "Mom had a fall. She's in the hospital." The news hit like a thunderclap. The mother he hadn't seen in years, the fractured relationship he'd quietly hoped to mend, now suddenly fragile. Frank rushed to the hospital, his mind racing with old memories and unresolved guilt. Seeing his mother lying pale and weak in the sterile room stirred a storm of emotions: regret, sorrow, hope. She opened her eyes and smiled faintly. "Frank," she whispered. "I'm sorry for everything." The moment was raw and fragile. Years of silence, misunderstandings, and pain seemed to hang in the air. Frank squeezed her hand. "It's not too late." Over the next days, hospital visits and calls filled his schedule, competing with the demands of the workshop. The balance was fragile. He confided in Sarah, who encouraged him gently, "You're doing good, Dad. But you have to take care of yourself too." The setback with his mother reminded Frank that reinvention wasn't just about machines or projects, it was about healing broken parts of himself. He realized that transformation was messy, complicated, and deeply human. One afternoon, as Frank helped Joan solder a circuit board, she said quietly, "You've changed since this all began." "I see it." Frank looked at her, curious. "How?" "You don't just build things anymore. You build hope." Those words stayed with him as he left the workshop that night, stepping into the cool spring air. The setbacks, the hospital stays, the budget cuts. They were all part of the journey. Not the end. Frank's phone buzzed again. It was an email from Elon's team. A new message titled, "Keep Going." Inside was a quote from Elon: "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." Frank smiled, a steady warmth spreading through him. He was tired, sure. Sometimes overwhelmed. But he was still here. Still building. Still hoping. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that this was far from over. Just when Frank thought the walls were closing in, the universe offered a surprise. It came in the form of a letter, handwritten and carefully folded, slipped under the door of the workshop at Tom's hardware store. Frank picked it up, curiosity stirring in his tired hands. The letter was from Helen, a woman in her late 70s who had attended only one workshop months ago but had quietly watched from the sidelines since. She wrote about her late husband's woodworking shop, about how she missed the smell of sawdust and the sound of tools, and how the workshops had rekindled a spark she thought was lost forever. But what struck Frank most was her offer. Helen wanted to donate her husband's old tools and open her garage to create a sister workshop in her neighborhood. Frank read the letter twice, a rare smile breaking across his face. He called Helen immediately. Their first conversation was warm and filled with stories of lost dreams and rediscovered purpose. She invited him over to see the space she had cleared for the new workshop. When Frank arrived, the garage was dust-covered but brimming with potential. Old workbenches stood sturdy, shelves lined with worn but cared-for tools, and a few half-finished projects sat waiting. Helen's eyes shone with quiet determination. "This was his world," she said softly, "and I want to make it ours again." The partnership was exactly what Frank needed. Between Tom's hardware store and Helen's garage, the workshops grew into a movement. Word spread across town and beyond, seniors building, creating, reclaiming their lives one project at a time. Frank found himself traveling between the two sites, teaching, learning, and listening. At Helen's, he met people he hadn't known existed: Ruth, who had been a nurse but never thought of herself as handy; George, a former electrician who now found joy in teaching others; and Linda, who used the workshop as therapy after her husband's passing. The stories were as diverse as the people, but all shared the same thread: age was no longer a barrier but a badge of resilience. One afternoon, Frank was surprised to see a young man arrive at Tom's workshop, a volunteer named Jake. Jake was in his early 30s, an engineer working at a local tech startup, fascinated by Frank's solar projects and the spirit behind the workshops. At first, some of the seniors were wary of Jake's fast-paced, digital world. But Jake approached with respect and curiosity, asking questions, offering help, and never assuming he knew more. Over time, he became an integral part of the team, bringing fresh ideas, helping with wiring diagrams, and even teaching basic coding for microcontrollers. Frank saw in Jake the same spark that Elon Musk often spoke about, the hunger to challenge limits and create new possibilities. The intergenerational connection breathed new life into the workshops. Sarah and Josie often came to observe, Josie eagerly soaking up Jake's tech talks while Sarah helped organize events and manage communications. One evening, as the group gathered around a freshly assembled wind turbine, Jake said, "You know, this isn't just about building gadgets. It's about building confidence." Frank nodded. "Exactly. We're building futures." But the challenges persisted. Funding remained tight, and the workshop at Tom's had to reduce hours. The senior center still faced bureaucratic resistance, and local politics often sidelined their cause. Yet Frank refused to give in. He began writing letters to city officials, local newspapers, and nonprofits, telling their story in a way that couldn't be ignored, one filled with real faces, real change, and undeniable proof that seniors were far from done. One day, Frank received an invitation to speak at a community forum on aging and innovation. The forum was packed with city leaders, healthcare workers, and advocates for the elderly. Frank's heart pounded as he took the stage, looking out at a sea of faces both skeptical and curious. He shared the story of the workshops, the setbacks, the victories, the people who refused to fade away. He quoted Elon Musk, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." His words hung in the air, resonating with unexpected strength. Afterward, a wave of applause filled the room. Frank felt a shift, a small but significant change in how the city viewed its seniors. A councilwoman approached him afterward, her expression serious but hopeful. "We want to support your workshops. Let's talk funding and space." It was a breakthrough. Back at the workshop, the news spread quickly. Edna smiled broadly. Joan wiped tears from her eyes. Carl shook Frank's hand firmly. Helen called from her garage workshop, "Looks like the tide might be turning." Yet Frank knew this was only the beginning. There was still work to do, healing to continue, barriers to break, and dreams to build. The workshops had become more than projects, they were a revolution of spirit and identity for seniors everywhere. One quiet evening, Frank sat in his favorite chair, the soft glow of a lamp casting warm light over his notebooks filled with ideas. Josie sat nearby, sketching a poster for the upcoming fundraiser. Sarah was on a video call, organizing volunteers. Frank's phone buzzed again, this time, a message from Elon's Twitter feed, "Keep pushing boundaries. Age is just a number. The future belongs to those who dare to build it." Frank smiled, feeling a familiar surge of purpose. He typed a reply, "Thanks, Elon. We're just getting started." As the workshop doors closed for the night, Frank looked around at the tools, the half-finished projects, and the memories being made. He thought about the setbacks, the unexpected allies, and the community that had grown beyond what he ever imagined. The journey was far from over. But one thing was clear, seniors were not fading away. They were building. Together. And the future was theirs to shape. Months passed since the city council agreed to support the senior builders' workshops, and Frank felt a quiet excitement brewing beneath the surface. The workshops had secured a larger, dedicated space at the old community center, a building long neglected but full of potential, much like the seniors it now served. The renovations were slow but steady, volunteers painting walls, assembling benches, setting up shelves, and cleaning years of dust and forgotten memories. Frank often wandered through the echoing halls, imagining the laughter, the stories, and the creations that would fill the space once again. On the morning of the grand reopening, the sun broke through heavy clouds, casting a hopeful light over the town. Frank stood by the entrance, watching as familiar faces arrived, Edna with her bright scarf, Joan clutching her toolbox, Carl with a new twinkle in his eye. Newcomers trickled in as well, curious and eager to join. The room buzzed with anticipation and energy, a mixture of nerves and excitement. Frank took a deep breath and addressed the crowd. Today, we open more than a workshop. We open a door to possibility, to connection, to reinvention. We're here to build not just projects but a future where age is never a limit. The applause was warm and genuine. The first project was ambitious, constructing a community garden powered by solar energy and automated watering systems, a blend of nature and technology that symbolized the workshop spirit. Teams formed, tools clattered, and voices mingled with the scent of fresh earth and paint. Jake led a group on the tech setup, while Helen and Ruth organized planting schedules. Frank moved between groups, offering guidance, encouragement, and sharing stories of Elon Musk's relentless pursuit of innovation despite obstacles. As the garden took shape, so did something deeper, a sense of pride and belonging. Weeks later, the community garden became a symbol of what was possible when seniors refused to be sidelined. Local media covered the project, calling it a new chapter in aging. Frank was invited to speak at regional conferences and on podcasts, sharing the workshop story and inspiring others. One evening, while preparing for a talk, Frank received an unexpected email. It was from Elon Musk's office, inviting him to meet at a technology conference happening nearby. The message was brief but unmistakable: "We've been following your work. We believe your story can inspire many. Let's connect." Frank's heart raced. The opportunity was surreal, a chance to meet the man whose words had sparked his transformation. At the conference, Frank stepped into a large auditorium filled with innovators, entrepreneurs, and dreamers. When Elon took the stage, the crowd erupted in applause. After the keynote, Frank was ushered backstage. Elon greeted him with a firm handshake and an easy smile. "Frank," he said, "I've heard about your workshops. You're doing something incredible." Frank felt a mix of awe and gratitude. "Your message pushed me to keep going. It reminded me age isn't a cage but a key." Elon nodded. "Exactly. Innovation thrives on persistence and courage. You're proving that spirit doesn't diminish with time." They talked for nearly an hour, about the challenges seniors face, the potential of technology to empower, and the importance of community. Elon encouraged Frank to dream bigger, to use his story to ignite change nationwide. Inspired, Frank returned home energized, ready to expand the workshops, reach more seniors, and continue breaking barriers. The workshops flourished, attracting partnerships with universities, tech companies, and healthcare providers eager to support aging innovation. Frank collaborated with Jake to develop easy-to-use kits for seniors to build renewable energy projects at home. Sarah organized virtual sessions, making workshops accessible to those who couldn't attend in person. Josie's Junior Builders blog gained traction, bridging generations through creativity. One day, Frank received a call from a national foundation interested in funding a pilot program based on his workshops. The news was overwhelming, a testament to how far they'd come. Reflecting on the journey, Frank realized the breakthrough wasn't just the new space or the partnerships. It was the shift in perception, how the community now saw seniors as vibrant contributors, innovators, and leaders. The path hadn't been easy, there had been setbacks, doubts, and fears. But with each challenge, Frank and his fellow builders had chosen to rise, to build, to inspire. Standing in the sunlight filtering through the workshop windows, Frank whispered to himself, "We're just getting started." And for the first time in decades, the future looked wide open. Despite the growing success of the senior builders' workshops and the recognition from the city and beyond, Frank still faced moments when doubt crept in, uninvited and unwelcome. The late nights spent balancing the demands of the workshops, family, and his mother's care wore on him. There were mornings when the weight of expectations felt like an anchor, pulling him down into uncertainty. One afternoon, after a particularly long day, Frank sat alone on a bench outside the new community center. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the parking lot. He watched a group of teenagers skateboarding nearby, their carefree energy both inspiring and a stark contrast to his own exhaustion. Sarah called, her voice gentle but concerned. "Dad, are you okay? You sound tired." Frank forced a smile he knew she couldn't hear. "I'm fine. Just thinking. You don't have to carry this alone, you know." Those words lingered. Frank thought about how he'd always been the pillar. The fixer, the doer, but hadn't fully allowed himself to be vulnerable. That evening, as he sat in his garage, tinkering with a small solar panel prototype, his phone buzzed with a message from Joan, feeling overwhelmed. "Come by. We'll figure it out together." He accepted. Joan's home was warm and welcoming, filled with plants and photographs that told stories of a rich, full life. Over coffee, Joan listened as Frank shared his fears, the burnout, the pressure, the fear that maybe, despite their efforts, the world still saw seniors as invisible. Joan smiled, a steady light. "Frank, I've lived long enough to know that doubt is part of the journey. The question isn't if it comes but what you do when it does. But what if the doubts are right? What if this is too much?" Frank's voice cracked. Joan reached out, placing a reassuring hand on his. "Then you keep going anyway. Because what you're doing matters. You're changing lives, including your own." The next day, Frank woke with renewed determination. He shared Joan's words with the workshop team, who nodded in understanding. They too had faced their own shadows of doubt. Together, they created a safe space to talk about fears and frustrations, turning vulnerability into strength. Inspired by Elon Musk's ethos of embracing failure as a step toward success, Frank encouraged the group to share stories of setbacks and lessons learned. The openness forged deeper connections and resilience. Yet the external challenges persisted. Local media began to question the sustainability of the workshops, casting doubts on funding and long-term impact. Some city officials hinted that senior programs weren't a priority in tight budgets. Frank found himself once again writing letters and making calls, fighting not just for resources but for recognition of the value seniors brought to the community. One evening, after a particularly discouraging meeting, Frank returned home feeling drained. He turned on a recording of Elon Musk's speech at a tech summit, where Elon said, "When people tell you something can't be done, that's a sign you need to work harder and smarter." The words echoed in Frank's mind like a challenge and a call to arms. That night, he drafted a plan for a new initiative, combining technology, education, and community outreach to broaden the workshop's reach. He reached out to local schools, proposing intergenerational programs that would bring young and old together to build, learn, and share stories. The idea was met with enthusiasm and curiosity. Soon, Frank was coordinating meetings with educators and parents, crafting curricula that merged hands-on building projects with lessons about resilience, creativity, and aging. The first pilot program launched with mixed results, excitement from some, hesitation from others, but Frank saw potential. Watching a group of teenagers carefully teach seniors how to use tablets, and seniors sharing stories of past careers and life lessons, he felt the deep power of connection. Through the doubts and setbacks, Frank realized the journey wasn't linear. It was messy, unpredictable, and profoundly human. Yet every step forward, no matter how small, was a testament to courage and hope. One rainy afternoon, as Frank closed the workshop for the day, a woman approached with a shy smile. She introduced herself as Linda, a new participant who had been following the workshops online but was nervous about joining. She shared how her late husband's illness had left her isolated and uncertain. Frank welcomed her warmly, remembering his own fears when he first started. "You're never too old to start something new," he said gently, echoing a phrase Elon often used. Linda's eyes brightened. "I want to build again. To feel alive." And in that moment, Frank saw the true breakthrough, the spark of possibility lighting up another life. The doubts still came, but they no longer held power over him. Instead, they were fuel, driving him and the community forward. Frank thought back to the long road from that first solar mower in his garage to this vibrant workshop filled with laughter, learning, and dreams. The message was clear: aging wasn't an end, but a beginning. And with every tool lifted, every project completed, and every connection made, seniors were proving that their best days were still ahead. The progress of the workshops had brought a new rhythm to Frank's life, but one area remained fragile: his relationship with his daughter, Sarah. Since the early days of his journey, their conversations had been polite but distant, strained by years of misunderstandings and missed moments. Frank often wondered if his newfound passion and late-life transformation could heal old wounds. One Saturday afternoon, after a successful community event at the workshop, Frank found Sarah lingering near the exit, hesitant but curious. "Dad," she said softly, "can we talk?" They stepped outside into the warm sunlight, the sounds of laughter and tools fading behind them. Sarah looked down, searching for words. "I've been thinking a lot about what you're doing. About how you've changed. It's inspiring, but I also realize I haven't been part of it. I guess I've been scared. Scared of how different things have become." Frank nodded, understanding the weight behind her admission. "I've made mistakes too," he said gently. "I wish I had been there more. I want us to build something together, if you'll let me." Her eyes glistened. "I'd like that." Over the following weeks, their relationship began to shift. Sarah started volunteering regularly at the workshops, bringing her organizational skills and tech savvy to support the growing community. She introduced new ideas for outreach and digital storytelling, helping to capture the spirit of the workshops in a way that resonated beyond their small town. Frank watched with quiet pride as Sarah flourished alongside the seniors, bridging generations with patience and heart. But rekindling family ties wasn't without challenges. Old tensions surfaced, disagreements about priorities, fears about change, and the silent ache of lost time. One evening, after a heated discussion about the future of the workshops, Frank and Sarah sat in silence, the weight of their history pressing down. Frank broke the quiet. "Sarah, I know we can't undo the past, but maybe we can write a new chapter, together." She smiled, the tension easing. "I'd like that too." Around them, the workshops thrived as a beacon for others navigating fractured relationships and second chances. Edna reconnected with her estranged sister through the community garden project. Carl mended ties with his grandson by teaching him woodworking. Helen found healing in mentoring a young woman learning the trade. These stories became part of the workshop's legacy, a testament to the power of connection and forgiveness. Inspired by these experiences, Frank proposed a special event, Building Bridges, a weekend retreat for seniors and their families to come together, create, and heal. The idea was met with enthusiasm but also nerves. Frank knew it would be raw and real, a chance to face difficult emotions and open hearts. The retreat weekend arrived with a mix of sunshine and clouds, symbolic of the journey ahead. Families gathered, some hesitant, others eager. The workshops became a sanctuary where walls came down, and stories flowed. Activities blended hands-on projects with heartfelt conversations. One session involved building memory boxes, small wooden chests to hold treasured items and stories. Frank guided a group, including Sarah, as they worked quietly side by side. The simple act of crafting together opened doors to dialogue. Sarah shared childhood memories, laughter mingling with tears. Frank listened, offering his own stories and apologies. Other families found similar moments, reconnecting through creation, empathy, and shared vulnerability. The retreat wasn't perfect. There were moments of frustration and tears. But through it all, a powerful transformation took place. People left feeling lighter, hopeful, and more connected. News of building bridges spread, inspiring similar programs in other communities. Frank reflected on how Elon Musk's example had shown him the courage to face fear and failure, to build new paths even when the future seemed uncertain. Rekindling relationships was another form of building, sometimes the hardest kind, but deeply rewarding. One evening, as Frank and Sarah closed up after the retreat, she turned to him. "Thank you for inviting me in. For trusting me." Frank smiled, warmth flooding his chest. "Thank you for coming." Their journey was ongoing, a work in progress, but they had taken the first steps toward healing. Frank realized that transformation wasn't just about individual change but the ripple effects of connection, how one person's courage could inspire a community to come alive again. The workshops had become more than a place to build projects, they were a space to rebuild lives and relationships. Frank's message to seniors everywhere grew clearer: you're never too old to heal, to love, to build anew. Your story is still unfolding. And with that truth lighting the way, Frank and his community moved forward, ready for whatever the next chapter would bring. Frank had always believed that purpose was something you found early in life, a calling to a career, a family, or a passion. But the workshops and the journey with Elon Musk's example showed him something different: purpose could be rediscovered, reshaped, and reignited at any age. It was this realization that fueled a new fire in Frank's heart. One morning, as he walked through the community garden, sunlight filtering through the leaves, he thought about how far they'd come, not just in building structures or solar projects, but in building meaning. For years, Frank had felt invisible, like a shadow fading into the background. Now, he was a leader of a movement that gave seniors a platform to create, connect, and thrive. That sense of purpose was palpable in the laughter of workshop participants, in the careful hands tending seedlings, in the sparks of ideas flying during brainstorming sessions. Sarah approached, holding a tablet with data from a recent survey they had conducted. "Dad, look at this. Nearly 90% of participants say the workshops have improved their sense of purpose and well-being." Frank smiled, proud but not surprised. "That's what I've been saying all along. Purpose isn't about age, it's about engagement, contribution, and belief." He recalled a quote Elon Musk had shared in an interview: "People work better when they know what the goal is and why." Frank realized the same was true for life itself. Purpose was the why that kept them moving forward. The workshops began focusing more on personalized projects that aligned with individual passions. Helen, who had once struggled with loneliness, started teaching woodworking classes, rediscovering joy in craftsmanship. Carl began designing adaptive tools to help other seniors with limited mobility, blending innovation with compassion. Edna documented oral histories from longtime residents, preserving stories that might have been lost. Frank found himself mentoring these projects, watching the way purpose transformed people. One day, during a session, a new participant named Tom shared his story. A retired teacher, Tom had spent years feeling disconnected and uncertain about his next steps. The workshops gave him a new mission: designing an educational app for seniors who wanted to learn technology basics. Tom's enthusiasm was contagious, and the team rallied behind his project. Over the next months, the app evolved from concept to prototype, driven by seniors who knew firsthand the challenges of learning new skills later in life. Frank marveled at how this project brought together so many elements: the spirit of innovation Elon embodied, the strength of community, and the power of purpose. But purpose wasn't just about creating, it was also about giving back. Frank and Sarah partnered with local hospitals and rehab centers to introduce workshop activities as part of therapy and wellness programs for seniors recovering from illness or injury. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Patients reported feeling more motivated and hopeful, a testament to how engagement could heal not only the body but the spirit. At a regional conference, Frank spoke about these successes, emphasizing that purpose was a vital ingredient for healthy aging. "We're not just building projects, we're building lives," he said. "Purpose drives resilience, sparks creativity, and connects us to something larger than ourselves. Later that evening, as Frank sat alone in his office, he thought about Elon's relentless drive, not for fame or fortune, but for a vision that pushed boundaries and defied limits. That same drive was alive in the seniors he worked with every day. Age wasn't a cage, it was a catalyst. The community center buzzed with activity as plans took shape for an annual Purpose Festival, a celebration of creativity, learning, and contribution. The festival would showcase projects, offer workshops, and invite families and neighbors to witness the energy and talent of the senior builders. Frank felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was more than a hobby or a side project, it was a movement transforming how society saw aging. One afternoon, a reporter asked Frank what advice he would give to seniors feeling stuck or hopeless. Without hesitation, he replied, "Find what lights you up." It could be building, teaching, gardening, or learning something new. When you have a purpose, even the smallest steps become powerful. You're not too old to start over, you're just getting started. The workshops continued to grow, drawing attention from policymakers and nonprofits interested in replicating the model. Frank and Sarah worked tirelessly to ensure the programs remained accessible and inclusive, honoring the diversity of experiences among seniors. The success wasn't just in numbers but in transformation, stories of renewed confidence, healed relationships, and dreams reborn. One evening, as Frank closed up the workshop, he noticed the setting sun casting golden light across the garden. He thought about the journey, the moments of doubt, the breakthroughs, the people who had come together to prove that life didn't end at 60 or 70 or 80. Purpose had been the key. It was the message Elon Musk had helped him hear: "You're just getting started." And with that, Frank felt ready for whatever the future held, knowing that purpose would always be his guide and his fuel. Just when Frank thought the workshops had reached a steady rhythm, an unexpected opportunity appeared, shaking everything up. One afternoon, while reviewing emails, Frank noticed a message from a large technology company interested in partnering to develop senior-friendly innovation tools. They'd seen the viral stories about the workshops and wanted to collaborate on a pilot project. The offer was exciting but daunting. Frank knew this could expand their reach significantly but also bring new pressures and challenges. He gathered the core team to discuss the possibilities. Sarah, energized by the prospect, suggested integrating cutting-edge technology like 3D printing and augmented reality to enhance learning and creativity. Others voiced concerns about complexity and accessibility, worried the seniors might feel overwhelmed or excluded. The debate was passionate but respectful. Frank listened, recalling Elon Musk's advice about taking risks and pushing boundaries while staying grounded in reality. He proposed a phased approach. Start small, test carefully, and ensure that seniors remained at the center of every decision. The team agreed. Over the next few weeks, they met regularly with the tech company's representatives, sharing ideas and concerns. Frank found himself navigating unfamiliar territory, contracts, budgets, intellectual property, but he welcomed the challenge, knowing the potential impact. Meanwhile, the workshops continued as usual, balancing innovation with inclusion. One participant, Helen, expressed excitement about learning 3D printing. "It feels like stepping into the future," she said, eyes wide. "I never thought I'd use this technology." Tom, who had developed the educational app, volunteered to help others adapt to new tools, bridging the gap between experience and innovation. As the pilot project launched, the workshops buzzed with fresh energy. Seniors experimented with designing prototypes, visualizing concepts through augmented reality, and collaborating across generations. The learning curve was steep, but the determination was stronger. The pilot attracted media attention again, this time highlighting the integration of seniors into the tech revolution, a powerful counter-narrative to stereotypes of aging and obsolescence. Yet with growth came growing pains. Some seniors struggled to keep up or felt intimidated. Frank made sure to create support groups, pairing tech-savvy volunteers with those needing extra help. The goal was clear: technology should empower, not exclude. One afternoon, during a demonstration, Frank noticed an elderly man, Mr. Lewis, quietly working on a simple design. When Frank approached, Mr. Lewis smiled and said, "I never thought I'd be building something like this at my age. It feels like I'm starting over." Frank nodded, remembering his own journey. Starting over is just another way of getting started. The partnership with the tech company also opened doors for funding, allowing the workshops to acquire new equipment and hire additional staff. This brought relief but also introduced new administrative responsibilities. Frank balanced the demands carefully, always returning to the core mission, creating a space where seniors felt valued, capable, and connected. As the pilot phase neared completion, Frank and Sarah prepared a presentation for the company's leadership and community stakeholders. They showcased not just the projects but the stories, the transformations, the friendships, the sense of purpose reignited. The presentation was met with enthusiastic support and a commitment to continue the partnership. Feeling a sense of accomplishment, Frank allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The workshops had evolved beyond anything he had imagined. They were no longer just local gatherings, they were part of a movement redefining aging. Late one evening, Frank sat in a quiet workshop, surrounded by half-finished projects and the soft hum of machines. He thought about Elon Musk's relentless drive to innovate, to challenge norms, and to imagine the impossible. That spirit had become the heartbeat of the community. Frank's phone buzzed with a message from Joan. "Remember, it's not about how fast you go, but that you keep going." He smiled, grateful for the steady friendships that had supported him. The unexpected opportunity had tested and expanded their limits, proving that seniors were not just participants but pioneers in a rapidly changing world. Frank realized that the journey was far from over. With each new challenge came new chances to grow, connect, and inspire. The message remained clear and vibrant: you're just getting started. Despite the outward successes and growing recognition, Frank faced an internal battle more difficult than any technical obstacle or public skepticism. The relentless pace of innovation, partnership meetings, and community demands weighed heavily on him. He found himself lying awake at night, mind swirling with to-do lists and worries about the future. He began to question whether he could keep up, whether his energy and spirit could sustain the momentum he'd helped create. One morning, after a restless night, Frank paused before entering the workshop. The familiar scent of wood and metal usually brought comfort, but today it felt overwhelming. He stepped outside and noticed a butterfly struggling to emerge from its chrysalis on a nearby branch. For minutes, Frank watched the fragile creature, pushing, striving, sometimes faltering. The butterfly's struggle was a mirror of his own. Change was painful but necessary, growth demanded effort, and transformation didn't come without challenge. Inspired by this small moment, Frank returned inside with a renewed sense of resolve but also the humility to ask for help. He confided in Joan and Sarah, sharing his fears of burnout and doubt. Their responses were immediate and heartfelt. Joan reminded him, even the strongest need rest and support. "You're not alone." Sarah offered to take on more responsibilities and encouraged Frank to delegate more often. Taking their advice, Frank began to restructure his days, carving out time for rest and reflection. He introduced mindfulness sessions at the workshop, inviting participants to join him in simple breathing exercises and meditation. The response was unexpectedly profound. Seniors shared that the sessions helped calm anxious thoughts and improved focus. Frank realized that caring for the mind was as important as building skills or projects. Around the same time, Frank came across an Elon Musk interview where Elon spoke about the importance of resilience, not just in facing external challenges but in managing internal struggles. "You have to be honest with yourself about your limits," Elon said. "And you have to be willing to adapt, to change course if needed." This message resonated deeply. Frank decided to write a candid blog post, sharing his experiences of doubt, fatigue, and the process of seeking balance. The post struck a chord with many readers, sparking conversations about the mental health challenges seniors often faced but rarely discussed openly. Encouraged by the response, Frank organized a support group within the workshops focused on mental wellness. The group became a safe space for sharing fears, hopes, and coping strategies. Frank listened as participants spoke of loneliness, grief, and the pressure to keep pushing despite feeling exhausted. They found strength in community and vulnerability. Meanwhile, the technical and educational programs continued, but with a gentler pace and more emphasis on well-being. Frank worked with Sarah to develop resources on managing stress, pacing projects, and recognizing signs of burnout. One afternoon, during a support group meeting, Edna shared a story from her youth about a time she had faced overwhelming challenges and how she learned to ask for help. Her courage inspired others to open up. The workshops transformed into a holistic environment, not just a place for building and learning but a sanctuary for healing and growth. Frank's own transformation deepened. He learned that leadership wasn't about being unbreakable but about showing up authentically, embracing vulnerability, and fostering resilience. The internal challenge, once a source of shame, became a catalyst for deeper connection and understanding. One day, Sarah surprised Frank with a gift, a framed photo collage of moments from their journey, the first workshop day, the family retreat, the launch of the tech pilot, and candid shots from support group meetings. At the center was a quote from Elon Musk: "Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up." Frank hung the collage in the workshop, a daily reminder of the journey and the strength within. As the seasons changed outside the community center's windows, so did Frank. He embraced the rhythm of growth and rest, challenge and triumph. The butterfly he had seen weeks ago had finally flown free, an emblem of transformation. Frank realized that aging wasn't about resisting change but about embracing it fully, with all its struggles and victories. The message remained clear: no matter the obstacles, no matter the fears, seniors were still pioneers, explorers in the ongoing adventure of life. They were just getting started. The workshops had become a beacon of hope and transformation in the small town, but Frank felt an urge stirring within him, a desire to expand beyond the familiar, to take what they had built and share it on a wider scale. It was a restless energy, the same spark Elon Musk often spoke about, the drive to push boundaries and imagine what could be, even when the path was uncertain. One morning, as Frank sat with Sarah in the workshop, he shared his thoughts. "We've done incredible things here, but I wonder, what if this could reach other communities? What if we could inspire seniors across the country to find their own purpose and power?" Sarah's eyes lit up. "I've been thinking the same. Maybe we start with a traveling program, workshops that visit other towns, bringing the tools, the mentorship, the spirit." The idea was bold, and as with every bold step, fear crept in. Could they manage the logistics? Would other communities respond? Would the funding hold? Frank reminded himself of Elon's words about fear: when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds aren't in your favor. With that mindset, they began planning. They reached out to regional leaders, nonprofits, and potential sponsors. The response was encouraging. Many saw the value in empowering seniors, in rewriting the narrative of aging. A grant from a foundation dedicated to innovation and community revitalization provided the seed money. Frank and Sarah assembled a small traveling team, including workshop veterans like Helen and Tom, to pilot the program. The first stop was a nearby town struggling with economic decline and a growing population of isolated seniors. Setting up in a community center, they introduced hands-on projects, tech learning sessions, and support groups. The response was immediate and profound. Seniors who had felt forgotten discovered new energy, new connections, and a renewed sense of worth. The media picked up the story again, highlighting how Frank's workshops had evolved into a movement. Frank spoke at local events and shared the core message: it's never too late to start something new. Your experience, your voice, your creativity, these are powerful tools that the world still needs. Traveling from town to town, Frank witnessed the universality of the challenges seniors faced: loneliness, invisibility, fear, but also the shared resilience and potential. Each community brought unique stories, and the workshops adapted to honor local cultures and needs. At one stop, a group of veterans found healing through building model aircraft, connecting their skills and memories to new creations. At another, retired teachers developed tutoring programs for youth, bridging generations. Frank reflected on the ripple effect of purpose and connection, how a single idea sparked in a small workshop had grown into a network of hope. Late one evening, after a long day of travel and setup, Frank sat on the porch of the community center, staring at the stars. He thought about his own journey, from feeling invisible and defeated to becoming a catalyst for change. The message Elon Musk had shared so often echoed in his mind: when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. This wasn't just about workshops or projects, it was about reclaiming identity, rewriting stories, and proving that life's potential didn't diminish with age. Frank's heart swelled with gratitude and determination. There was still so much to do. The horizon was wide open. He realized the journey wasn't just about reaching more people but about continuously evolving. Listening, learning, and adapting. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky, Frank felt a profound truth settle within him: the best was yet to come. Aging was not a conclusion but a new horizon to explore. The journey was far from over. They were just getting started. The sun rose slowly over the quiet town, casting golden light on the familiar streets and the bustling community center where Frank's workshops had transformed so many lives. Today was different. It was the day of the first national summit, a gathering of seniors, leaders, innovators, and families from across the country who had been touched by the movement Frank had helped ignite. As Frank walked into the center, the atmosphere buzzed with energy and anticipation. Banners reading, "You're just getting started," fluttered, and the walls were adorned with photos capturing moments of joy, struggle, and triumph from the workshops. Frank's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and humility. He remembered the long nights, the doubts, the moments when he thought the fire might burn out. But here, surrounded by hundreds of faces, each story a testament to resilience and transformation, he knew the journey had only just begun. The summit opened with speeches from participants like Helen, who had found joy in woodworking and had become a mentor, Tom, whose app was now used nationwide, and Joan, who shared how community had healed her loneliness. Each story echoed the message Elon Musk had sparked in Frank's mind years ago: age is not a limitation but a launching pad. Frank took the stage last, looking out over the crowd. He spoke with raw honesty: "I was once afraid I was invisible, that my best days were behind me. But I learned something powerful, that we are never too old to start, to change, to build a new future. We carry wisdom, experience, and a fire that can light the way for others." The room erupted in applause, but Frank's voice softened as he added, "This is not just my story. It's ours. And it's a story still being written." After the speeches, the summit featured workshops, panels, and networking sessions. Seniors connected across regions, sharing ideas and forming new collaborations. Policymakers listened intently, inspired to support initiatives that empowered aging populations. Frank moved through the crowd, shaking hands, exchanging hugs, and feeling the pulse of a movement growing stronger every day. Later, in a quiet corner, Sarah handed Frank a letter she had found among the summit materials. It was from Elon Musk himself, a personal note congratulating them on their work and encouraging them to keep pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Keep challenging the narrative. Keep inspiring. You're just getting started, the letter read. Frank held the letter close, tears welling in his eyes. The symbolic connection to Elon, the man whose fearless vision had sparked this journey, felt like a benediction. That evening, as the summit wound down, Frank stood outside under the stars, reflecting on the path that had brought him here. He thought about the moments of doubt, the struggles with health and purpose, the friendships forged, and the lives changed. He realized that the true legacy wasn't in the projects or the programs but in the hope and courage they had sparked. Frank spoke softly into the night, "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." A young woman approached, introduced herself as a volunteer inspired by the workshops to start a similar program in her hometown. Frank smiled and said, then you're exactly where you need to be. We're all just getting started. The summit closed with a pledge. A promise to continue the work, to support each other, and to rewrite the story of aging for generations to come. As Frank looked around, he felt a profound sense of peace and possibility. This was not an end but a new beginning, fueled by courage, connection, and the unshakable belief that life's best chapters often start when we dare to begin again. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?